So Malachi, I'm going to start with you. You went out and actually talked to a number of people in neighborhoods all over Detroit about this issue. Talk about what brought us to this point where we've got so many people who need this much help. But I guess also give us a sense of how optimistic people are that this new program from the city and that the other efforts can actually make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, this has been a major issue in the city of Detroit for quite some time. It feels as though we are kind of reaching a point now where the level of investment in these houses, needs to be increased, or we're going to, be in a pretty significant crisis. And some folks, I think, are describing the kind of home repair situation as an ongoing crisis. And there's a number of different factors. It's, very complicated situation, but just to kind of give you, a sense of the need, the University of Michigan's Poverty Solutions group has estimated that, in total, this is, the amount of investment needed is not just in the hundreds of millions of dollars, but bordering close to $1 billion with a B. And it's really, throughout the city. If there's not one particular neighborhood, it's pretty widespread. But again, I mean, I think there's a number of factors you could point to. Generally the city's housing stock is very old, which poses an issue to keeping things in shape. Most of the houses in the city were built, before 1950. So there's some significant kind of legacy investment that needs to happen there to keep properties that are that old in shape. There's also the kind of cycle of families losing possession of a home and then that turning into vacant properties sitting. Perhaps they get transferred to the land bank or another organization that puts it in the hands of somebody, but at the time that that person obtains a home, perhaps it's been vacant for some time and there's some pretty significant repairs that need to get made. You have a lot of seniors in the city who are living on fixed incomes and have a lot of deferred maintenance programs that they just simply can't afford to pay for on their own. And one thing that came up a lot during our conversations was just the impact of the overassessment issue in Detroit, where property owners were overtaxed, in the order of some $600 million. And a lot of folks said that they would have put that money into their houses had they had access to it.
So if I could jump in. So yeah, there's some historical factors that we have to look at, right? So right now we look at Detroit as a primarily poor city, or a lot of these neighborhoods are low income people. But, having been raised in Detroit and growing up in Detroit, I can tell you that real estate values on homes did not appreciate like they did in the suburbs. Mm-hmm. And so when you're talking about deferred maintenance, when you live in a suburban community and your home appreciates in value, you can take out that second mortgage and you can fix up your home and repair the roof and replace it and furnace and everything like those expensive repairs that even middle income people struggle to pay based on their annual incomes. And of course, we have the wealth gap, but also the ongoing inability for homes to generate new value for homeowners in our community has just been something, and it continues. And right now, in the past, it was redlining, and now we don't call it redlining, but we have appraisal practices and policies that have the same, perpetuate the same kind of activities as redlining, because they say homes in these communities have to be at this level of value. If other homes are this level of value, we can't compare these homes to other people's homes. And that's really difficult. And the other thing is the failure of banks to lend in certain communities because of low values. And they don't call it redlining. They just say, we don't lend in communities where homes are valued at this amount. Mm-hmm. And so when people are shut out of that valuation market during the years that they're earning income and they're able to repay, and then they become seniors, their homes are declining, and they've been unable to stop the decline when they could, and now they're stuck with even bigger bills because the preventive maintenance wasn't done.
Yeah. So Donna, I want to talk a little more about that historic loss, and I talk about it as a wealth loss, a Black wealth loss that took place in the city during my lifetime, right? I'm born in 1970 in a house that was in a neighborhood that had become majority African-American just a few years before I was born. The people who bought those houses should have been in a position to pass on that generational wealth to their kids, me, to my children. Instead, if you look at the neighborhood where I was born over on Tuxedo near Livernois and Grand River, all of the value in that neighborhood is gone. I mean, all of it, literally, and houses sold for long periods of time for $500 or less. That loss of wealth is one of the things that tells us about, I think, this inability to keep houses up, whether you had the house or not. And a lot of people lost those houses in that neighborhood. You lost the wealth that you should have gotten from property investment.
Right. And now, let's say you live on a block and people have their homes taken for tax foreclosure for any reason, whether it's overassessment, they just couldn't pay, they didn't pay, whatever the reason is. Maybe some people didn't qualify for tax exemptions and they didn't get them, but you lose your home, and a couple of people lose their homes on their block. They lose their wealth, right? But you lose your wealth too, because your home value has plummeted as a result of things completely outside your control. And so now you still have to fix this house. It feels as though we know there was structural, institutionalized governmental racism that in housing, and that has been perpetuated through private practices and to some extent sanctioned by the government even today, because you still, again, have these appraisal rules that are somewhat unfair to many neighborhoods. And Andre Perry speaks about that. Some of us talk about the Black tax. So as we look at this situation and we understand there's a systemic problem, we need systemic solutions and not these one-off solutions where we're going to help a few people, but leave other people in a bad situation. And I think there is an argument just based on what Malachi was saying about the data that would suggest that improving home values by fixing up homes and creating and fixing this problem would actually increase the value of the city of Detroit. Improve its bond rating over time, improve the kinds of things that mayors and city councils and other forms of government should care about, because ultimately, if the values are improved and people are living in better housing, that can result in improved taxation down the road. But I feel like we have short-sighted solutions around housing, and we're unwilling to take the same kind of risk in helping people who live in homes as we are for corporations that say we're going to do things to increase the workforce. And we're willing to, really go above and beyond to say, let's figure that out. And I think we need to really turn and say, who are the real building blocks of communities? And it's going to be residents, and residents who live in houses.
So Heather, the city's program to help people repair their homes is one of the steps that's being taken. Donna was talking, of course, about more systemic answers, but let's learn a little more about what the city's doing and why you think it'll make a difference.
Absolutely. So I think I love what you just said, Donna, about there have been systemic problems and we need to have systemic solutions. And I think that for New Detroit, we're hoping that to be the first step of many to start kind of fighting back and making an impact on the great need that we know is there. So what we did last year was when we received the American Rescue Plan funds, we did a series of community engagement, over 60 meetings in less than 30 days. That really said what we all already knew to be true. Home repair is like that number one thing that everybody wants. We know it's a huge need. And so we are the only single appropriation that came out of the $826 million. So many of these, it gets put into buckets. I think we put it into about 15 buckets. And there's one that's solely put aside for home repair. So that was $30 million that we put aside. And 30 million to the point of that total number, definitely it's much smaller, right? If people who are researching this are saying it's getting into the billions, we know that 30 is not the same. But what it is that there's also a lot that we have to coordinate when we're doing these repairs. So there's contractor capacity. There's how do we actually get people in? And then also, how do I ensure that I get that money into contracts and actually spend it so I'm not losing it on the back end? And so 30 million was that first step. We knew we wanted to create a program that we could scale. And so it really is set up very differently. Whereas many of these other programs are emergency or kind of first come, first serve. So if you're number one on the list, you get served first, obviously the second person, and on the way down. This is very different. Where we were saying, let's put out a huge application. Let's take thousands of people in, and then let's pick 1,000. Let's actually let's start creating a pipeline. And it's the way that I've been describing it is, can we set up an assembly line for home repair so that we can start doing it in a much faster way and a much higher volume? What that doesn't mean though, and I think this is the toughest part that we're working through, is if I'm creating an assembly line, I'm one piece in that cog. And so we know that without many other things, both after me and before me, no one's going to get to that complete home situation when you're thinking about these systemic issues that our community has been facing. So we know that we wanted to focus on roofs because we felt it would be the largest impact. It's one of the most expensive repairs. And then we're really trying to figure out, how do I piece together the programs and the right resources so that if you need much more than a roof, which most of the homes that we go to do need more, how do we start lining them up for success so that we can put them on that path? And that's really what we're trying to do with Renew Detroit.
Yeah. And it would be great if what Renew Detroit hopefully will come together with community development organizations like mine that are also in neighborhoods working to renew houses. Because I think when we really work together and we say, let's figure out who are all of the actors in this space so that we can supplement the resources and that kind of thing, it'll be a better picture for all of us.
Malachi, I do want to get a sense from you of what you're hearing from people who are participating and whether they're optimistic about this changing not just their homes, but their neighborhoods.
Yeah, I would say for the folks who have been able to, secure a new roof through this, through the city's program, it's been transformative and really, powerful for them. So I don't want to, disparage the city's efforts there. I think for folks who are getting these programs, like it is making a big impact. But what I'm hearing, from folks is just a lot of kind of confusion and frustration about how some of these programs are targeted. For the Renew Detroit program, it's going toward folks who are exclusively seniors, disabled, or low income who apply for property tax exemption. And obviously, like, those are probably folks that have the highest need, right? So I think it makes sense from a process standpoint, but we're just talking about like the level of scale that this problem, we're dealing with here. And I would be interested to see in the future if this kind of builds a foundation to kind of scale up that efforts, make more people eligible. Every time we do a story about these different programs, phase 2 for the program opened in October and will include window replacements in addition to roofs. There's so much interest from people that just unfortunately aren't able to be eligible for it. Another thing I want to bring up too is that this is, in addition to being an economic issue, it's a public health issue in some cases. When you have a hole in your roof and water's getting in, snow is getting in, cold temperatures are coming in through your house. Animals in a lot of cases are being able to access your home because of, issues with your roof or your window. That creates, in some cases, pretty serious health risks for vulnerable people. So that's kind of another layer of how this is a really intertwined problem with a lot of other issues in the city. Another interesting thing that I hadn't really even thought about until we kind of hit the streets and started talking with people too, is just, we hear all the time about the lack of contractors in the city, when it comes to demolitions and constructions and really anything. But we also heard that a lot of local handymen simply aren't able to do this work because of how prices for materials have gone up. So even if perhaps you weren't going to go hire a licensed contractor, there's people in a lot of neighborhoods that do that work for you. And unfortunately, they just haven't been able to afford it. I've also run into some folks who said that they've been scammed by some local contractors. Maybe they were able to raise a couple of grand to do something, but somebody ran away with their money. People had their stimulus checks stolen during the pandemic. So there's a lot of, unfortunate kind of implications when it comes to actually connecting people to resources.
I think economic inclusion is super important. And how do we include handymen and locally talented folks in job opportunities and contracting opportunities and help overcome those barriers through licensing programs and through some type of bonding, sharing, whatever we can do. And we know that we're working with small businesses to get that done. I also want to say $1 billion is really large in the context of home repair, but not so much in demolition. Imagine a mayor saying, I'm going to repair every broken house in the city and running on that promise. We say we're going to demolish every vacant structure in the city. And so, but the thing about that is that you can never do that because we have structures that are becoming newly vacant every day because of untended home repair problems. So it's like when we
tax foreclosure,
tax foreclosures, when we look at we're not really reducing the inventory of vacant structures at the pace that we should be, considering the fact that we are on pace to spend at least $800 million on home repairs in the past 5 years. And so imagine saying we're going to commit this kind of funding. I think that when we have political people who imagine a world where people don't have to live in this type of housing, where they are not responsible for the conditions of their neighborhoods and their inability to access capital. And we reimagine a world where there's historic stuff. We talk about reparations. We're not even, reparations look sometimes like we're going to help people live in homes with good repair, given all of the systemic reasons why they don't have them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that those are all important things to keep in mind. And also the fact that people who are well housed are more likely to go to work, go to school, engage in job training. They're less likely to break the law. Housing impacts every element of
It plays
life.
a role in everything. Yeah. Heather, I want to give you a chance to respond to some of that and talk about how much the city is thinking about some of these bigger ideas, some of these bigger programs, connecting this kind of policy to the other problems that we have to solve them in a systemic way.
Definitely. So I think everything that Malachi and Donna is saying, I think we are, I'd say, obsessive about, right? Like, we're thinking about it every day. And when the mayor approached me and asked me to help come up with this Renew Detroit program, the immediate next step was, yes, this is part of what we're assigning to you, but like, you have to understand the greater ecosystem of what's happening. So like, I started a very long journey that I will continue to be on for what feels like the rest of my career, of learning how do all of these different things work together so that we can connect with CDOs, so that we can make sure, like, how are we serving each gap that exists?
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of it too, I mean, I agree, like there clearly have been systemic decisions long before any of us were here that have really led to the problem that we're seeing. And so like, one of the things that we did when we did the program design for Renew, most home repair programs require putting a lien on the property for a certain amount of time. Most of them have a dollar limit. And although there are very, very good reasons for that, and that doesn't necessarily need to change for those programs, we actually went out of our way to do all the research on the American Rescue Plan funds and make sure that we could take those out. Because if we are assisting seniors, and God forbid they do pass shortly after this work happens, we're hoping that they're in a situation, one, where that can pass on to somebody else in their family. And then we're actually starting to get to the point where, to Donna's point, are we finally starting to make an impact so that more people are stabilized and we're not adding to that vacant home count? Because when we really were sitting down and saying, like, how do we create that home repair program that's actually going to start making an impact? It's, can we get ahead of the need? And that's going to take years. But can we actually stabilize people in their homes? So that's actually a question we ask on our application. Like, do you feel stable in your home? And then we're going to continue to ask them that in different ways throughout the entire process to see, like, do they feel more capable of staying in their home because of this resource that they got? So that's something that we're really tuned into and thinking about as well.